So let's get right into it. This whole situation in Washington, it's pretty crazy. It looked like we were going to avoid a government shutdown. There's this bipartisan spending bill. Everybody seemed to be on board.
Yeah.
And then Elon Musk steps in and kind of derails the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So how could a single person have that kind of impact?
Right.
That's what we're going to try to unpack today. We've got a collection of news articles here.
Okay.
They kind of take us through all the events leading up to what might end up being a shutdown. So this is your deep dive into how it all went down.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you see this seemingly ordinary process just become incredibly volatile.
Yeah.
We start with the spending bill.
Right.
It includes disaster relief, after those hurricanes,
right.
aid for farmers, even money to rebuild that Baltimore bridge that collapsed.
Oh, yeah.
Speaker Johnson thought he had a bipartisan deal. Everything was going smooth.
And there's even some very specific items that make this whole thing feel very real, like funding to give that land where RFK Stadium sits to the local government. Maybe clear the way for a new Washington Commander Stadium.
Exactly. And that's before we even get to the controversy over the congressional pay raise.
Right.
The first one in over a decade.
Okay, so we've got this spending bill. It's got a lot of crucial stuff in it.
Yeah.
And then Elon Musk, who's heading up Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, comes out swinging against it.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that DOGE is not actually a government entity.
Right.
This is an outside group focused on cutting spending, and Musk is leading the charge. So his involvement in this whole situation is pretty unusual.
Yeah, definitely unusual. I mean, picture this. You're Speaker Johnson.
Yeah.
You think you've got a deal. Everybody's happy. And then, bam, 4:15 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
You see Musk posting on X saying that this bill absolutely should not pass.
That timing is really something.
Yeah.
There's a sense of urgency, maybe even impulsiveness in that 4:15 a.m. post.
Right.
And this wasn't just a one-off thing either.
Yeah.
Over the next 12 hours, he just unleashes this barrage of over 60 posts on X.
Wow.
Using some pretty strong language.
Yeah. He doesn't hold back, does he?
No.
He calls it terrible, criminal, outrageous, even goes so far as to threaten lawmakers who support the bill, saying they deserve to be voted out of office.
What's even more concerning is that he's actually spreading misinformation about the contents of this bill.
Wow.
He's claiming there's a 40% pay raise for Congress tucked away in there.
Oh, wow.
And billions in new aid for Ukraine. These are blatant falsehoods that were debunked almost immediately.
It's unsettling that somebody with his platform and influence is spreading these kinds of claims, especially given how much weight his words seem to carry with certain Republicans. So
absolutely. There were a few Republicans who were already on the fence about this spending bill.
Yeah.
Take Representative Burleson from Missouri, for example.
Okay.
He's a member of the House DOGE caucus, so he's already aligned with Musk's ideology. Musk's opposition really fueled their efforts to kid this bill.
And it's almost like a domino effect. You see more and more conservative Republicans joining in, calling for a shutdown.
Yeah.
Representatives Green, Burchett, Mace.
Right.
They all start echoing Musk's sentiments.
It's amazing how quickly the entire conversation shifted.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, why does Musk's opinion hold so much sway?
Right.
I mean, he doesn't have an elected position. He's not representing any particular constituency.
Right.
Yet his words can seemingly derail a major piece of legislation.
It really makes you think about the power dynamics in our political system, doesn't it?
It's definitely a head-scratcher, and to make things even more complicated, Trump himself eventually weighs in.
And here's the interesting thing. Trump was initially silent on this whole issue. He only comes out against the bill after Musk had already stirred up all this opposition.
Right. And he throws another wrench in the works.
Oh, yeah.
By demanding a debt ceiling increase before his inauguration.
Now, for those who might not be familiar,
right,
the debt ceiling is essentially a limit on how much money the government can borrow. Increasing it is always a politically charged issue.
Yeah.
And usually it's handled separately from spending bills.
Right.
But Trump wants to tie these two things together.
Wow.
Which puts even more pressure on Speaker Johnson.
Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
On the one hand, he's got Trump and Musk demanding changes to the bill. On the other hand, there's the very real possibility of a government shutdown.
Right.
If he can't get this passed.
It's a tough spot to be in. You can really feel the tension building in these articles.
Yeah.
And there's a growing sense that Johnson might be losing control.
Oh.
Some Republicans are even suggesting that he should be removed as Speaker. If he can't navigate this crisis,
Wow.
the stakes are incredibly high.
So we're left with this dead spending bill. The clock is ticking, and a government shutdown is becoming more and more likely. So what happens next?
Well, Congress is scrambling. They're trying to come up with some kind of alternative before that funding deadline hits. And remember, this is all happening just days before Christmas.
Oh, yeah. One of these articles mentions that the Office of Management and Budget is already telling federal agencies to start preparing their employees for a potential shutdown.
Right.
Imagine the holiday stress.
It's moments like these that really drive home the real-world consequences of these political maneuvers. Millions of federal workers facing furloughs, essential services getting disrupted.
Yeah.
It's not just an abstract political game.
Right.
This impacts people's lives in a very tangible way.
It's a good reminder that the decisions made in Washington, especially when it comes to funding the government, they have a ripple effect across the country.
Absolutely. And the reactions within the Republican Party itself are pretty revealing.
Yeah, how so?
Well, you've got those who are firmly in the Trump-Musk camp.
Okay.
Representative Green, for instance, is basically saying, let's shut it down. We can sort it out once Trump is in office. And then you have more moderate Republicans like Senator Curtis, who seem incredibly frustrated by the whole situation.
Yeah.
He's on record saying there are no good options left and admitting he's not a fan of shutdowns.
So it really highlights those divisions within the party.
Yeah.
And it underscores the challenges that Speaker Johnson is facing trying to hold everything together.
Speaking of Johnson, his position as Speaker is looking increasingly precarious. There are Republicans openly calling for his removal, arguing that he's lost control.
Like who?
Representative Massey even went so far as to say he won't support Johnson in the next Speaker election.
Ouch, that's gotta sting.
It's a dramatic shift. Just a few weeks ago, Johnson appeared to be in complete control, and now he's fighting for his political survival.
Wow.
All because of the influence of a billionaire who isn't even part of the government.
It's mind-boggling when you think about it. How can someone outside the traditional power structure have this much impact?
It raises some fundamental questions about wealth and its influence in our political system. Is this a sign of things to come? Will we see more unelected billionaires dictating policy?
It's a disturbing thought, for sure.
Yeah.
But before we get too far down that road,
Yeah.
let's take a closer look at the spending bill itself.
It's worth remembering that there's a lot more to this bill than just disaster relief and farm aid.
Right.
These articles point out several other provisions that were tucked away in there.
Like what?
Some of them are pretty interesting. There's the funding to rebuild the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore.
Oh, right. The one that collapsed earlier this year.
Exactly. And a provision to give control of RFK Stadium to the District of Columbia.
Okay.
Which could pave the way for a new Washington Commanders Stadium.
Interesting.
There are also healthcare policy changes, including a measure to try and lower prescription drug costs, and even a provision to force ticket sellers and hotels to be more transparent about their pricing.
That's something I think a lot of people can get behind.
They really did try to cram everything into this bill, didn't they?
Yeah.
No wonder it ended up being over 1,500 pages long.
Which, of course, makes it even harder for lawmakers to actually understand everything they're voting on.
Exactly. And this is a perfect example of how these massive spending bills, these so-called omnibus bills, can become so controversial and create so much gridlock.
And it's worth noting that Speaker Johnson initially promised to avoid these kinds of bills, but he ended up caving to pressure from both Democrats and members of his own party. It seems like there's a lot of finger-pointing going on right now.
Yeah, it's a messy situation. You have this incredibly complex spending bill. It's been torpedoed by a billionaire and a president-elect. Congress is in chaos. A government shutdown is looming. And the Speaker's job is on the line.
Yeah, where do we even go from here?
It's enough to make your head spin. But before we start speculating about the future, maybe we can gain some perspective by looking at past government shutdowns.
Okay, good point. These articles actually include some interesting information about previous shutdowns. And you're not going to believe this, the president with the most shutdowns was Ronald Reagan.
Really?
Yeah. No way. That's not the image most people have of him.
I know, right? We often think of Reagan as a champion of bipartisanship, but there were 8 government shutdowns during his presidency.
Wow.
More than any other president since.
That's a bit of historical trivia that really challenges our assumptions.
It does. It suggests that even a president known for his ability to work across the aisle can find himself in situations where a shutdown is unavoidable.
So what does this tell us about the inherent challenges of our political system?
Well, it's a good reminder that things aren't always as black and white as they seem.
But what seems different about this situation is the undeniable influence of Elon Musk.
You're absolutely right. This isn't just a typical political battle between Democrats and Republicans.
Right.
We're seeing a non-elected individual, a billionaire, with a massive social media platform, wielding enormous influence over government decisions.
So what does this all mean for the future? Is this a one-off event?
Right.
Or are we entering a new era where billionaires can essentially call the shots?
Yeah.
That's a question we'll have to grapple with as this story continues to unfold.
It's pretty wild to think that we started this conversation talking about what seemed like a pretty routine spending bill. And now we're talking about, the potential collapse of the entire system.
It's certainly been a roller coaster ride, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And as we reach the end of our deep dive here,
right,
it's crucial to kind of zoom out and consider the bigger picture.
Right, because this whole situation has really exposed some vulnerabilities in the way our government functions. We've seen how easily misinformation can spread, how quickly a simple bill can become a political battleground.
And how much influence a single unelected billionaire can have.
It raises some serious questions about accountability and transparency, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And about the role of wealth in a democracy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of these articles mentioned that Musk spent a staggering $277 million.
Wow.
Supporting Trump and other Republicans in the last election.
It's an almost unimaginable sum of money.
Yeah.
And it's hard to ignore the leverage that kind of financial contribution can buy.
It's almost as if he's secured a place at the table, even though he wasn't elected to anything.
That's a really interesting point. Is this kind of influence a new phenomenon?
Right.
Or has it always been a part of politics, just less visible? And how does this align with the idea of democratic representation, where the power is supposed to reside with the people?
Those are tough questions. And I don't think there are any easy answers.
No.
But it's definitely something we need to be talking about.
Absolutely.
If this trend continues, it could fundamentally change how our government operates.
And this isn't just happening at the federal level either. Right. We're seeing this influence of billionaires at the state and local levels as well. Yeah. From education to environmental policy, it seems like they're having a significant impact on decisions that affect everyone.
So how do we, as informed citizens, ensure that our democracy remains truly representative of the people?
Yeah.
What steps can we take to maintain that balance of power?
Well, it starts with awareness, I think. Recognizing these trends, having these conversations, and demanding more transparency from our elected officials.
And being discerning consumers of information is critical, too.
Right.
Especially in this age of social media where misinformation can spread so quickly.
Absolutely. We need to be critical thinkers, question our assumptions, and seek out diverse perspectives.
Well said. That brings us to the end of our deep dive into this complex and, frankly, unsettling situation. We covered a lot of ground, from the details of the spending bill itself to the broader philosophical questions about wealth and power.
Hopefully we've given you some food for thought.
Yeah.
And maybe even inspired you to dig a little deeper on your own.
Because ultimately the power does reside with the voters.
That's right.
The more informed we are, the better equipped we are to hold our leaders accountable and shape the future that we want.
So stay curious, keep asking questions, and never underestimate the power of an informed citizen.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll be back soon to explore another fascinating topic. Until then, stay engaged and keep learning.